But it's much more complicated than that. I shouldn't have tried to talk China policy in 10 minutes on television here.
Well, let me bring it back to the United States. I want you to meet Jocelyn Fish, a Democrat from Racine. Jocelyn is the Director of Marketing for a community theater. Jocelyn, welcome. Your question.
Hello. Good evening, Mr. President. Student loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
The American dream is to succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream when debt is many people's only option for a degree? We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or a public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools. My children, I went to a great school, I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it. And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that much money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think any family making under $125,000 whose kids go to a state university they get into, that should be free as well. And the thing I do in terms of student debt that's accumulated is provide for changing the existing system now for debt forgiveness if you engage in volunteer activity. For example, if you're teaching school, after 5 years, you'd have $50,000 of your debt forgiven. If you worked in a battered women's shelter, if you worked and so on. So you'll be able to forgive debt. Thirdly, I'm going to change the position that we have now to allow for debt forgiveness, because it's so hard to calculate, whereby you can now, depending on how much you make and what program you saw, you can work off that debt by the activity you have, and you cannot be charged more than X% of your take-home pay so that it doesn't affect your ability to buy a car, own a home, et cetera. Each of my children graduated from school. I mortgaged the house. I was listed as the poorest man in Congress for, not a joke, for over 30 years. And, but I was able to borrow, I bought a home I spent a lot of time working on, and I was able to sell it for some profit. But my oldest son graduated after undergraduate and graduate school with $136,000 in debt after working 30 hours a week during school. My other son went to Georgetown and Yale Law School, graduated $142,000 in debt, and he worked for the parking service down in Washington. My daughter went to Tulane University and then got a master's at Penn. She graduated $103,000 in debt. So I don't think anybody should have to pay for that, but I do think you should be able to work it off. My daughter's a social worker. My other son ran the World Food Program USA, and so on. They didn't qualify. But my point is, I understand the impact of the debt, and it can be debilitating. And I think there's a whole question about what universities are doing. They don't need more skyboxes. What they need is more money invested in making. That's why I provide, for example, $80 billion, $70 billion over 10 years for HBCUs and other minority-serving universities, because they don't have the laboratories to be able to bring in those government contracts that can train people in cybersecurity or other future endeavors that pay well. But I do think that in this moment of economic pain and strain, that we should be eliminating interest on the debts that are accumulated, number one. And number two, I'm prepared to write off the $10,000 debt, but not 50.
Mr. President, let me ask you.
because I don't think I have the authority to do it by sign of a pen.